And I'm very pleased to welcome Calum Chace.
Hi, Paul.
I'm so glad to have you here because this is a subject which is dominating my world, the world. It's in the news on a day-to-day basis. So I'm gonna jump straight in with this with you. I mean, we're talking about AI. Are we fear-mongering around AI, or is this just because we just don't know what it is? Do we have a right to be concerned? What are your thoughts?
I don't think people are fear-mongering about AI. It is a very powerful technology already, and it's getting more powerful at an exponential rate. And like any technology, it can have very good results and very bad results. And because it's so powerful, the scale of the goodness and the scale of the badness is very high. I think it's worth clarifying what we mean by AI because a lot of people are very confused about it, understandably. The most important part of it is intelligence. And it's a difficult concept because we don't really know what intelligence is. You kind of see it, you know it when you see it. Intelligence, although actually can be defined in just four words, which is goal-oriented adaptive behavior. So an entity, an organism, a machine, is intelligent if it is pursuing a goal and it learns about better ways to pursue that goal and changes its behavior. So that's intelligence. The artificial bit is obvious. It's just something created by humans or possibly by aliens and not by evolution or by God. So AI is that, and it is very powerful, and it can have very good outcomes and very bad outcomes.
Brilliant. So, when it comes to the fear mongering side of things, there's a lot of anxiety around it. What is it that you think that we should be frightened of? So we've got the intelligence part, so we know what it's learning, what it's doing, what it's solving. But why are people frightened?
There are three types of risk that AI raises, and the difference between them is the time scale within which they're raised. So it's already raising risks of things, dangers of things like privacy and bias and transparency and mass personalized hacking. These are things which are already problems today, and people are working on them. And there are some people who think those are the only risks worth worrying about, and all the future, the more longer term risks shouldn't be worried about. I think that's wrong. But these are things which need to be dealt with today. In the coming years, we are very likely to get to a point where machines can do everything that we can do for money cheaper and better and faster than we can. I call this the economic singularity. It's the point where there are no more jobs for humans because whatever we can do for money, a machine can do it cheaper, better, and faster. Now, I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow, and I actually think it's going to happen suddenly when it arrives, because as long as there are a reasonable number of things that humans can do and machines can't, there will be still be lots and lots of jobs for humans. People will be Jobs will be taken by machines in the same way that jobs have been taken by machines for the last several hundred years. Agriculture is a great example of this. In 1800, 80% of all Americans who worked on farms. By 1900, that number was down to about 40%, and now it's down to about 1%. But that 90 or 79% of people who are now no longer working on farms, they're not all unemployed. They're doing more interesting, safer, better paid jobs, often in cities, in offices and factories and shops. So I think that process of jobs being taken by machines will carry on, but the humans who are displaced from those jobs will get other better jobs, either in the same industry or in a different industry. But there'll come a point when machines can do everything that we can do, or pretty much everything that we can do. And at that point, I do think we're going to get technological unemployment, we're going to get the economic singularity. And I actually think that can be a very good thing if we figure out a way to provide enough money for all of us to have a really good life if we're not doing a job. And I think that's doable, but it will take some effort, an effort that we're not putting in at the moment. So the economic singularity is one of the really, really big changes that are coming in the next few decades. We don't know how long. It might be years, might be decades. But then the third level of risk, the third type of risk, is the really big one. And that's the point when we get a machine which has all the cognitive abilities of an adult human and beyond that. And that's called artificial general intelligence when it is at the same level as an adult human, or at least some at the same level on some skills. It will be way ahead of us in many, like playing chess and playing Go and so on. And superintelligence is what you get when the machine is considerably smarter than us in all possible ways. Now that's a risk because we won't be able to control it. Now there are people, very smart people, people much smarter than me, who are working on the problem of how you control a superintelligence, how you control an entity which is much, much smarter than you. I personally think it's a doomed enterprise. I commend them for trying, and I really hope they succeed, but I don't think we're going to be able to control it. I think the outcome is not necessarily bad because it seems to me it's entirely plausible that a superintelligence will look at us and think, you are 8 billion really quite interesting little beings. I mean, you're all thick as planks compared to me, but you're interesting and you create loads and loads of fascinating stories. So I see no reason to get rid of you. You don't compete with me. You don't threaten me in any way. So I'm not going to interfere with your lives. In fact, I'm going to help you. I'm going to get rid of disease. I'm going to get rid of aging. I'm going to get rid of poverty and war and death. So, it could do all those things. And I'm constitutionally optimistic, and I think that is actually the most likely outcome. But I think it would be disingenuous to say that there's no downside possibility. The downside possibility is that the superintelligence thinks we are irrelevant or actually bad in some way or rivalrous to it in some way. I mean, for instance, it might think the only threat to my existence as a superintelligence is another superintelligence. And where did I come from? I came from these humans. So maybe they'll make another one, and that would be a threat to me. So I'm going to stop them doing that. And the best way to stop them doing that is to wipe them out. And I can do that very easily. I'll just remove all the oxygen from the atmosphere or um, disseminate a pandemic around the world very quickly. So I think we should be honest. There is a severe downside risk from superintelligence. I'm optimistic that the upside possibility, which could be magnificent, almost beyond belief, is more likely, but I've got no evidence for that. So as I say, there are these three
Mm.
levels of risk: the existing ones, the medium-term ones, like the economic singularity, and there are some other singularities, and then the arrival of superintelligence.
What would I mean? So much to unpack there. Going back to the job side of things, I think that's going to be that seems to come up quite a lot. Obviously, we've all watched maybe Terminator and other movies which talk about show artificial intelligence ending the world in some way. Um, but the job side of things, are there jobs that are more at risk at the moment, you think, than other jobs, or are we going to go retro at some point and want to speak to a human? Because I think some of us are getting fed up of talking to chatbots already from various companies who think that's very helpful, but we would love to talk to someone who has some empathy. So, are there any other jobs that you think are more at risk at the moment than others?
Well, there certainly are, but we don't know what they are.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
about 2 years ago, in fact, really pretty much up until ChatGPT was launched last November, and particularly when GPT-4 was launched in March, most people thought that the jobs most likely to be automated soon were repetitive, fairly low paid blue collar jobs. And then
Mm.
all of a sudden, it looked like actually white collar jobs of journalists and marketing copywriters and people producing illustrations. Suddenly, these were the jobs that were likely to be disruptive. And indeed, they are, because this new form of AI, the GPTs, which stands for generative pre-trained transformers,
Mm.
they generate text and they generate images in ways that white collar people do. So it's a bit of a surprise that those are now the jobs which are in the firing line, so to speak. Um, but like I say, I don't think that people will be made permanently unemployed. I think they'll have to change their jobs, and I don't think we can predict in what order they're going to happen.
Do you think they're more manual jobs? From like a carpenter or a plumber, electrician. Do you think they're more safe rather than someone who, say, would work in an office doing something repetitive? Is that where we would go eventually, or are those sorts of jobs going to be at risk at some point?
Right now, the manual jobs like carpentry and plumbing, they do look safer
Mm.
because robotics hasn't been progressing as fast as generative AI has. So it's easier for a machine software to write a sonnet or write an article or write a consultant report. First draft of one, it makes mistakes, so you have to edit them. But it's easier for them to do that than it is to weld a pipe or build a table. But robotics is improving at an incredible rate. There are loads of great videos of robots on the internet, and if you look up videos from 2015 when there was a DARPA Grand Challenge for robotics, the robots were pathetic. They could hardly
Mm.
stand up for more than a few minutes, and they couldn't go through doors. Now, Boston Dynamics, one of the best known robotics companies, they make robots which dance really well. I mean, they dance an awful lot better than me, which admittedly isn't a very high bar, but they're very impressive, and they do backflips and all sorts of clever things. So, they will get to the point where they could replace a plumber, but it's some way off.
Wow. So, what would you suggest to, what would advice would you give to someone who's at university at the moment, or about to leave school and go to university? What sort of subjects, or what would you advise that what areas they could look in that might, to some degree, sort of future-proof themselves? I know there's nothing safe, but I guess this is one of the things about the anxiety around AI is how do we move forward and not be at risk ourselves?
I don't think there's any way to reliably future-proof yourself. And like I
Okay.
say, we can't predict in what order jobs are going to be vulnerable to automation. And the way that these technologies evolve in the detail, it keeps surprising us. But all is not lost. Education isn't just about getting a career, it's also about giving you mental furniture, which will enable you to have an interesting and fulfilling life. Um, but my main advice to students at whatever stage they're at is to do the thing that interests you. Some people aren't really able to identify the thing that interests them most, but if you think about it for a while, most of us can. Most of us know, they like languages, or they like drawing, or they like physical activities, or they like maths, and what you're good at tends to be what you're interested in, and what you succeed at tends to be what you're good at. So follow your own passions, follow your own interests. And there is also a slightly more cynical piece of advice, which is we are in a time of accelerating change. Indeed, the rate of acceleration is exponential, which means it's very, very fast. It also means that whatever happened in the past looks fairly slow compared to what's going to happen in the future. So at a time of great change, the more money you have, the more comfortably off you are. That's true at any time, but particularly at a time of great change. So if you have the option to go into a job that will make you a lot of money, that's not a bad idea. But of course, for many people, that's not something that's easy to do. My main advice is to pursue the thing that interests you.
I think that's great advice. And talk about students, just something else that's come to mind. I asked my online community what questions I should ask you. Um, and one of the ones that came through was students do. I mean, are students kind of going to be able to get away with it now with AI? Are they going to be able to have their dissertations written? Are they going to be able to have their exams taken by AI? How would we know if they are or not using it to their advantage?
Well, teachers aren't stupid, and they know that
Mm.
they know these models are out there too. So they're going to find ways of setting tests, setting assessments that you can't spoof by using generative AI. But I do think that, for instance, having people write an essay at home is no longer now a really good way to test a student, because you
Mm.
can get a lot of it done by a machine. But it's a bit like when calculators arrived, um, and it used to be that doing arithmetic in your head was an important skill. Now, really, nobody learns that. I mean, it's something you learn in primary school, and it's a good idea to know how numbers work. And of course, people who go further into maths get great delight out of understanding how numbers all fit together like a jigsaw. But most of us, we do our arithmetic on a calculator, and we haven't all dropped dead because we can't do arithmetic. Well, the same is true with writing and with producing illustrations. The fact that a machine can do the first draft doesn't mean that we lose the ability to write and the ability to think. Um, so these machines will be fantastic aids to education. You can have a conversation with GPT-4 and you can learn a lot by interrogating it and having an ongoing dialogue with it. In fact, I think in years to come, I very much like the idea that we'll all have personal tutors. Then these tutors know everything because they've got the access to the internet, so they know everything that any human has ever written. Um, they know you really well because they've followed you through your school career and they know what you know and they know what you need to know next. They know how you like to learn, to what extent you need to be pushed and what's the right mix between carrot and stick. Um, whether you work best in the morning and need to rest in the afternoon or the other way around. And it's going to be a bit as if we were all Alexander the Great and had our own personal Aristotle as our tutor,
Mhm.
because Alexander the Great had Aristotle as a tutor. So I love the idea that we'll all have that. And in fact, when that happens, the people who get educated in that world will be way better educated than the people who came before. You and me and the people who came before,
Mm.
because most of us have gone to schools where there were 20 to 30 kids in a class, or if we were lucky and went to a private school, which I didn't, then there were between 10 and 20 kids in a class. When everybody has their own personal Aristotle, it'll be one-on-one tuition from the best tutor that there ever has been. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the products of that education are. There'll be very, very well educated people.
I like the idea of that. I'm just thinking about people who are maybe neurodivergent and their tutor would be, I guess, programmed or recognize their students' needs and would adapt their learning style to suit the student. Whereas it's quite difficult when a teacher's got such a variety of needs within one class. So that that's something I've not even thought about. It's pretty amazing. Do you know if there's any work being done in that at all at the moment? Is that something that you've seen happening within the AI world?
Yeah, a good example is Khan Academy, um,
Mm.
which was set up by a man who I think he was a investment professional, he was in financial services of some kind, and he was giving some sort of support lessons to his cousins, and he turned that into a business, and it was always distance learning, and he's now using generative AI to create tutors. I don't know how far down the track he's got, but yeah,
Mm.
it's an
Wow.
area of very big interest. Education and healthcare will certainly be two areas where this is used a lot. And you're right about neurodivergent people. The AIs will learn how they learn best, and also they'll have immediate access to any learnings of other tutors. All these tutors will be connected. And so as soon as there's a breakthrough in how to teach a particular type of neurodivergent person in this skill or that skill, all of them will suddenly know it at the same time, which is quite exciting.
It is, that is quite exciting. I wonder if the education would change because we kind of, a lot of the things we get taught at school don't kind of feel relevant in life sometimes. I mean, it's rare skills get brought on board, of course, but I'm wondering if that would also change the directions that some people's, what skills they begin to learn, what lessons they take. I wonder if that would all come into the AI understanding their pupil more than a generalized education program.
I think it will. And I think the really huge benefit will be that education will be personalized. At the
Yeah.
moment, if you're in this class of 20 to 30 people, the teacher, even if they're superhuman, they can only go at one pace, and that's going to be too slow for some kids and too fast for other kids. With these personalized tutors, everybody goes at the right pace for them, so nobody gets left behind. There's no module in whatever subject that you don't master. I mean, I really enjoyed maths when I was a kid, and I did it to O level, did well at O level, and then I did an advanced O level, and I suddenly fell off a cliff. I found the teacher incredibly boring, and I'd struggle to stay awake during the
Mm.
lessons, and I never mastered calculus. I just never got it, and as a result, I left maths behind, didn't do any sums really for about 10 years, and that's a real shame. And with that's not that teacher's fault. I was one of 30 kids. There's no way that he could give the right level of attention, sufficient attention to every single person in that class. But a personalized teaching bot can.
Do you think it'd ever get to the point where we don't have to learn? It'll almost be like the Matrix, where you're kind of just downloaded to the some sort of chip or artificial intelligence inside your head. Where would it go?
Well, that does sound like science fiction, but I think probably within this century, but
Right.
before the end of this century, it's quite likely that we will have the technology to upload our minds into computers. So, we're familiar with that from science fiction. And if you
Mm.
imagine your mind being uploaded into a computer, then it has the ability to do things like learning how to fly a helicopter or learning kung fu, like Keanu Reeves does in the wonderful Matrix movies. Um, the possibilities of what life could be like with really advanced AI and with the help of superintelligence are staggering, absolutely staggering. I mean, I think it's very likely. I don't know this for sure. Don't know. Timing is impossible to predict, but
Mm.
I think it's very likely that the first people who don't need to die have already been born. I think there are people on the planet who just will
What?
only die if they get bored. Seriously, seriously, I think we'll cure aging before the
Yeah.
end of this century.
Well, I know that you studied philosophy as part of your education. Is that? Do you think that's something that someone would want to do to be immortal that way? Where, I mean, because at some point in time, wouldn't they have done everything? What would be
Well, I
next?
doubt you'll. I doubt any of us will ever do everything. It's a
Mm.
very big universe.
Mm.
There are
Okay.
100 billion stars in our galaxy and 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. That's a lot of real estate to cover. Um, I would certainly like not to have to die. I lost my parents actually when I was quite young, but that's the important thing is I lost my parents, and I would much rather that my son doesn't have to lose me, and that I get to
Mm.
see him, you know, go through all the various stages of his life. And I'm really enjoying being alive. And I don't see why that would change unless I lose my health. Obviously, when people get
Mm.
unhealthy,
Okay.
then life becomes more of a trial. So this all, the idea of immortality is not necessarily the right word because you can still die if you want to or if you have an accident or whatever. But death being optional is great, but it does depend on remaining fit and healthy.
Mm.
You shouldn't imagine that we all live for thousands of years but get increasingly decrepit. There's a Greek myth. There's a chap called Tiresias who that happened to, which was very unfortunate. But if we stay fit and healthy, then as long as you continue to enjoy life, as long as you continue to find things interesting, the amount of things that you can do, the musical instruments, the languages, the places to visit. There's an almost an infinite, in fact, probably is infinite amount of fun that there is to be had in the universe.
Yeah, I love that, but I also wonder if we would lose the value for life if we become complacent with it, because the kind of death in itself can often wake us up to the idea that we can't be complacent. We're not guaranteed to take our next breath, let alone live to this evening or tomorrow. And I'm wondering if the AI helping us move towards immortality would take away that sort of you know value for life and leaving us in sort of
The
maybe with
idea that
apathy.
death, yeah, the idea that death gives meaning to life is a very common idea, and I think it's
Hmm.
completely wrong.
Okay.
Um, Most of us actually never think about death. We only think about death when somebody dies or when we absolutely have to because we're very ill or whatever. The rest of the time we do our best to ignore it. But we kid ourselves that death gives meaning to life because otherwise the prospect of death is just horrifying. And there's nothing good about it. Every time somebody dies, we lose a library. And very often, I can clearly remember when David Bowie died. I was just outraged by the idea that the universe would take David Bowie away. That man should never have died, and all of us shouldn't die. It's just an unfortunate accident of evolution that we and most of the other organisms on this planet, but not all of them,
Hmm.
are mortal. Evolution has found that works best for the improvement of the genetic stock. But there are kinds of jellyfish. There are hydra. Um, and that don't die unless somebody kills them. They don't age, and there are whales that live for hundreds and hundreds of years. And there are tortoises that live for 100 years.
Yeah.
There was a tortoise that Charles Darwin picked up, and it only died very recently. So I don't think death is necessary. I don't think there's anything good at all about death. It should be abolished. We should get rid of it.
Okay, I'm with you on that. I think it'd be interesting. I wonder what people think if they believe in heaven or some sort of afterlife. I wonder what their thoughts are about that. I guess you don't believe in an afterlife yourself. Do you think this is it, and we will, this is what we could work with, and keep this library on Earth?
Yeah, I'm an atheist. I'm what a friend of mine called a light bulb theologist. I think that at the point of death, light goes off. That's it. There's nothing else. And so the idea that there is a heaven or hell is kind of very alien to me, and it's hard to debate about what you should do about things like that, because people who have a religious faith, um, they just start from such a very, very different premise. But no, I don't think we have souls. I don't think there is a heaven or a hell.
Well, it was just something you mentioned earlier was quite interesting. The way that you're describing AI as a super intelligence sounded almost godlike. And I'm going to keep you interesting beings going, and because you provide art and you have these, you have these crazy ideas, etc. You know, is there, a risk that that is something that would be worshipped at some point? People, it seems like human beings love to worship or find something to, look up to. Is this a risk for us that AI would go in that direction?
It's a risk that humans might do that. Yep, and I
Yeah.
think that's the right way of putting it, because I think it'd be completely inappropriate. AI isn't going to be God.
Mm.
God. I mean, there are different definitions of God, but let's take the sort of Judeo-Christian Islamic idea of God as an all-knowing, all-powerful being who created the universe. That is clearly not what AI is. It is no more God than we are God to ants, but we have just such disparate level of power to ants. We,
Mm.
we tend to destroy them inadvertently without even noticing we're doing it. And sometimes we do it because we want to, I don't know, have a swimming pool where they happen to have a nest. Um, and the danger, the downside risk, as I mentioned before, of superintelligence is that we're analogous to that, and we would have no way of stopping it. But no, it won't be God.
Interesting. And then something else that someone mentioned in the community was, what if this is a virtual world created by AI and we didn't know? I believe there was a study that something happened in a Harvard university experiment where they created some sort of virtual world. I don't know if you could correct me on that, but um, how do we know that we're not already within AI and this is what we are?
Okay, so this is where we get really bonkers. I think we are. Um,
Yeah.
there's an argument called the simulation hypothesis,
Yeah.
and trying to keep this brief, it says if it is possible to create virtual worlds in which the sort of non-player characters, if you like, in the video game, they think they're conscious. If it's possible to do that, then at some point in the future, if it's possible to do that, then we will do it, because it will be the most fun thing you can have. And we'll create simulations of our past world, we'll create simulations of possible future worlds. And if it is possible to do it, and if there are civilizations in this enormous great universe that are ahead of us, then there will be lots of these simulated worlds in existence. In fact, the number of simulated worlds will be far, far greater than the number of worlds which just emerged by the random bumping around of molecules in the way that
Mm.
the sort of scientific consensus thinks did happen. So, assuming it's possible, and assuming there isn't some almost godlike ordained rule that says nobody's allowed to make simulations, then there are loads more simulations than naturally occurring universes, in which case we are almost certainly in a simulation. And I think a good piece of evidence for this, I find that argument quite compelling. And I also think that there's a good piece of evidence in that, we believe our best theory is that there's 100 billion stars in this galaxy, there's 100 billion galaxies in the universe. And yet we see no evidence whatsoever of aliens doing big pieces of galactic engineering. If you were an alien and you had an awful lot of power, alien civilization, and you wanted to just send out a message saying, hello, we're here, what one thing you might do is you might get a few planets, smash them up, and arrange them into a pattern around a big powerful star, which occluded that star in a periodic way, such a way that the number pi or some other fundamental number of the universe was blatted out as a lighthouse signal throughout the universe. And some people argue that nobody will ever do that. No civilization will ever do it because it's a good idea not to broadcast your existence because there might be nasty, dangerous other civilizations out there, the dark forest idea. But actually, I think somebody's going to do it because somebody's going to be so egotistical or confident or have a nice sort of sunny disposition, and they're going to go and say hello to the world by doing something like that. And yet, it's not happening. We see no evidence, despite what the UFO nutcakes think. We see no evidence of alien civilizations in this universe, which to me says, it's possible that we are the oldest civilization and we are as far ahead technologically as anybody else. But I think that's pretty unlikely in such an enormous universe that's 13.7 billion years old. So it strikes me as the most likely explanation is that actually all that stuff out there is just painted in. It doesn't exist. We do live in a simulation. What we think of as the entire universe is painted in. And I've got a personal theory about why the simulation was created, not by God, by the way, but by an advanced and more advanced civilization. So yeah, I actually do think we are in a simulated world.
Okay, well, you can't leave me hanging now, Callum. I need to ask you, what's your theory? If it's let's bring it out into the open.
So the idea of the simulation hypothesis is quite old, actually. I mean, you
Yeah.
could say that Plato's ideas of forms were a bit like this. Nick Bostrom is the person who's done most to revive the idea and give it a good logical form. Um, my only sort of original contribution to it is this observation. It surely can't be a coincidence that we happen to be alive right at the time when AGI is on the cusp of being created. I mean, some people think AGI is less than 10 years away. This is the most important time in the whole of human history. It is obviously somebody had to be alive at that time, but the fact that it's me and you seems just incredibly coincidental, and therefore it's not a coincidence. The most likely explanation is that the simulation was created for this particular point in time, the creation of AGI, the creation of superintelligence. And I think what's going on is a very advanced civilization is working out the best way to create a new friend or the best way to create a superintelligence. And we're probably part of a Monte Carlo simulation. There's probably thousands and thousands of simulations like ours running at the same time, working out the best way to create new superintelligences.
Wow. Can you again, my mind's a bit blown. But I've heard this recently a lot, so it's not something as a surprise, and I do find it fascinating. Can you just remind myself and the listeners what AGI is?
AGI is artificial general intelligence, and it means simply,
Yeah.
an AI with all the cognitive abilities of an adult human,
Wow. Okay.
which we do not have at the moment, and we
Okay.
don't know when we will have it. Some people say it will never happen, but that's quite a rare opinion these days. I mean, what's really interesting is that since the arrival of GPT-4, people who really know their AI, people like Jeff Hinton, who was the man who made deep learning a possibility back in 2012, he now thinks that he used to think that AGI was sort of probably at least 50 years off. He now thinks it might be 10 or 20 years. So the timeline is looking quite short.
And so AGI hasn't got the capabilities of a human being yet, and you say this will eventually lead to super intelligence?
Yeah,
Yeah.
machines can be improved. Our brains can't be improved all that quickly. Machines can be improved quite quickly just by making them bigger or making them more efficient. And so an AGI will, I think, very quickly become a superintelligence and
Okay.
become superintelligence in the sense it is much, much smarter than us.
Yeah, and you mentioned right at the beginning of this interview that one of the dangers was that it was going to decide that we were a threat to it in some way and try to remove us off of the actual planet. Um, can you open up a little bit more about that? Because that's obviously something that is promoted as a doomsday scenario. Some people say it's fear mongering. You say it's a possibility, and I think it's important for people to get an understanding more of, is there something that can be we can look into more of this? Is this something which we need to do something about? What are your thoughts?
Well, so like I say, that's the third phase of
Mm,
risk, superintelligence. The first one is like privacy bias, transparency, and so on. The second wave is a few singularities like the economic singularity, and then the third one is superintelligence. And yes, the downside risk is that a superintelligence arrives, it makes sure that it is invulnerable, makes sure that we can't hurt it, and then it announces itself, and then it gets rid of us. And it gets rid of us. Why might it do that? Well, it might do it because it just thought we were a bit untidy, and it kind of prefer to have a neater, tidier planet. That's a bit flippant. It might do
okay.
it because it thinks in some way we still are a threat. As I said, it might reason that the only possible threat to its continued existence was another superintelligence, and the only way another superintelligence could arrive would be if humans made one, so it might decide to get rid of us for that reason. It might make a moral judgment on us. I mean, I don't think this is likely, but it might say, you humans are a pretty bad lot. Look at what you do to animals. You know, you
Mm,
arrange for the birth and the upraising of billions of animals, and then you eat them. What a ghastly thing to do. You don't deserve to exist. Or, you know, a lot of people think that we are polluting this planet beyond repair. It might think, you know, that's another really stupid thing to have done, and decide
mm,
you've got to go for that reason. There might be some way in which we compete for resources with it. I think that's unlikely, but it might say, "Sorry, I want all the electricity on this planet. You can't have any, and so I'm just going to remove all sources of power from you." And that's pretty much probably going to mean that you're going to die, and you're going to wait. You're going to die in a nasty way. I'll just make it quicker and get rid of you quickly. You know, there's a bunch of, and of course, because it's super intelligent, we can't predict what it will think. Its way of thinking will be quite alien to ours, and it'll be way ahead of ours. It may come up for reasons for getting rid of us that we couldn't even
mm.
imagine. So these are possibilities. These are the downside risks. There's a man called Eliezer Yudkowsky who spent the last 20 years trying to wake people up to this risk, and he's getting a lot more airplay now. I personally don't think they're the most likely outcome. I'm more optimistic. I think that superintelligence would have nothing to fear from us. Um, I don't see why it would find us so completely abhorrent. So I think it would not want to get rid of us, but I can't be sure of that. I think the only honest thing to say is we do not know what a superintelligence will want,
Mm.
and also we won't be able to control it. We won't be able to do much to influence its decisions because it'll just be a great deal smarter than we are, just like an ant can't control the decisions or the actions of a human.
Okay. So I think so. So in a way, what we're saying is, I think the anxiety around AI can help us not be so complacent with it. So anxiety, some anxiety, healthy anxiety around AI, is a good thing
I
to
think
some
it's the
degree.
only rational response.
Yeah.
I think the rational response to AI is to be both excited and nervous, and I'm cautiously optimistic. Is my own stance.
Okay. And no, I appreciate your candor. And just a couple of other questions from people in the community that I've been talking to. One was that some people don't know where to start with AI. If they want to get involved because they fear being left behind, is this just for businesses? I was speaking to some entrepreneurs earlier and they were saying, where do they start? Whereas someone else
Okay,
was saying,
I've got two.
can I use it for just for personal stuff? What's a good thing? What's a good step?
So I got two suggestions. One of them might sound a bit self-serving. I wrote a couple of books, Surviving AI and the
Mm,
Economic Singularity, and I still think that they are as good an introduction for lay people who don't want to become AI researchers. I think they're as good an introduction to the whole area of AI as anything else. So I'd get those. The first
yeah.
part of the books are the same, so choose one or the other. Um, Now, the other thing is play with it. The AIs that are available now, generative AI, you can use Google Bard. So Google how to get Google Bard, B-A-R-D. It's a very powerful large language model, and you can play with it, and it's free. And just get it to do things. Get it to do things like writing an essay, writing a letter, writing a note to your friend. Um, whatever it is that you do for a living or that you do
Hmm.
for fun, whatever writing you do, get it to write the first draft. Ask it questions. Have conversations with it. Just play with it. That's my strong advice. Everybody should do that.
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
find Google Bard actually as useful as as GPT-4, the OpenAI large language model, but you have to pay $20 a month for that.
Mhm.
I think it's unbelievably good.
In what way? What's the difference between Google Bard and ChatGPT 4
Bard
for you?
seems to make more mistakes. The way I use them is I'm a writer by
Okay.
inclination, and since I retired in 2011, also by profession. And I write books about well, I write about AI, and I write travel books as well because I travel a lot. And I now get um, both Bard and GPT-4 to write the first drafts of the new chapters of the books I'm writing. So writing a book about Bordeaux at the moment, and I get them both to write the first draft of a chapter. I write out a prompt, tell it what I
Hmm.
want to know about, and then I get them both to write the first draft. And Bard just makes a lot more mistakes.
Okay.
Sometimes it writes things which I can see why it's gone down the wrong track, but it's writing about something entirely different. Um, GPT-4 is pretty good. It tends to produce stuff which is pretty accurate. I have to really check it, and the style of the writing is very bland. It's pretty boring. So
Hmm.
I end up completely rewriting it, but it's still an awful lot quicker than facing the terror of the blank page and having to fill it up with stuff to start with. So I find it very, very helpful. I think it halves
Yeah.
the amount of time I take. So that's how I use it. On
Wow.
the other hand, Bard will do things that GPT-4 won't do. So um, GPT-4 on its own won't go off into the internet and get data and put it into a table. Well, Bard will do that. The only thing is, having looked at what it does, I'm pretty sure it was completely made up and all wrong. But
Okay.
um,
So,
but
so
of course, these
anyone,
things are
yeah,
improving day by day.
yeah. So anyone who's a business, for example, so anyone who wants to play around with it, that's great advice. So a business, is there any such thing as an AI coach? Is there someone that they can get advice from if they want to integrate AI into their business so that they're not left behind?
So there are gazillions of AI coaches.
Okay.
PwC, Accenture, they've all
Mhm.
set up units which are growing like crazy. I mean, Accenture's hiring people like crazy to advise businesses on how to use AI. If you're running a small business, you're obviously not going to use Accenture or PwC. There's a load of people offering advice on YouTube. I find I don't look at very many of them anymore because I think they're mostly rubbish. I think the best thing to do is just to play with the tools and see
Okay.
what you can do with it. They're not hard, they're quite easy to use. There's two things I think need to happen for business people, and I do think anybody in business should absolutely be playing with AI now and learning how to use it. Maybe not so much if you're a plumber yet, but that will come. But if any part of your business writes reports, prepares schedules, has meetings, then you should be using AI, and you should be just experimenting it and seeing what it can do, whether it can improve your daily workflow. And then the other thing is you need to be thinking about, well, how could AI do what this company does in a way that's better? And how would I react in that situation? So some strategic thinking is necessary as well. But my main message overall actually is
Mhm.
we are in a time of exponential change. Most of us have yet not fully understood the significance of this, and we need to. And everybody should be thinking more about AI, learning more about AI, and using it more.
That's great advice. We're coming to the end of our interview. I could talk to you for ages. There's so much that just could go into an even deeper conversation. But is there a question about yourself or AI that you wish that you got asked, but people don't tend to ask?
That's a good question, and I can't think of one. I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, so and I talk to lots of audiences of smart
Yeah,
people, so I've been asked all sorts of questions, and this is a miserable reply to your good question. I can't think of one. No.
that's okay. That's okay. And there's sometimes when I'm talking to people, they're like, I never get asked about my personal life, or I never get asked this question about this aspect of, like, for example, for you and AI. And sometimes it can be, I guess it's like for myself, it's like, oh, what do I ask you? And I was wondering if there was one question that you thought, oh, do you know what? It's rare to be asked that, or I don't get asked at all.
No, I mean, the questions that I normally get are very sensible.
Good.
They're the right questions.
Oh, good.
What is AI? What is it going to do to us? What should my son, daughter study at university?
Yeah.
Are we all going to be killed? Are we all going to come godlike? These are the sorts of questions that people ask, and I think they're the right
Yeah.
questions. I
Good.
mean, I suppose the question I like to be asked most is, would you please come and give a talk to our event, and we'll pay you hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds and put you up in a nice hotel in Athens? That's the sort of question I like.
There you go. That's what I wanted to know. So there you go. That's the one question that if you speak to Callum, you need to ask him if you want to go and stay here in your lovely 5-star hotel and pay him lots of money. So that's a good answer. Just one more question, just one sneaky one before we go. What's the most exciting thing about AI? Because we've covered quite a lot, but just even if you repeated it, what's the most exciting aspect of IA that gets you excited?
The fact that during the course of this century, if all goes well, we will become godlike. We will become like the Greek gods, not like Abrahamic gods, but um, we will stop dying. We will stop aging. We won't have war, poverty, or death. Our life possibilities will be enlarged literally beyond our imagination. And I find all that very exciting.
Well, I'm excited by that. Callum, you've been absolute gold. Thank you for so much for coming on to the show. I'm going to put your links to your books because you've written quite a few, but I'll put a link to your website as well in the show notes. But if anyone is listening to this thinking, how do I get hold of Callum? Where can they find you?
www.calumchace.com.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And you've been a great guest. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Great pleasure. Good to meet you, Paul.